about to get stuck into that intercooler piping. We're just using 2-inch out of the turbo because that's what its outlet is, into the intercooler with a step up. It's relatively simple just because it's so far underneath the vehicle, which according to Tommy is not seen done before, but it was best for us to keep the piping out of the engine bay altogether. Makes it easier to put other things in the engine bay because you always have to. So 2-inch for that. These are just generic aluminium mandrels that we just cut up as usual and TIG weld together. 3-inch on the cold side, matches the throttle, matches the intercooler. It's pretty tight under there because Tom doesn't want holes cut in the car, which is fair enough. It's just got to go down past the alternator and engine fan. So it's a little bit tight there, but we'll just have to work it out. May have to use a bit of a donut to get a better, like a sharper curve, but we'll figure that out when we get there. As usual with intercooler piping or any piping, it's a lot of trial and error, just chopping things up and seeing what fits. Once we've got them all welded up, we'll bead roll them so the silicon holds better, so it doesn't blow off when we're running 30 pound through it.
What's that Toyota stuff in the background there?
It's just intercooler stuff for the turbo kit.
Just intercooler stuff?
Got to put all that away first so we don't get crap all over it.
Looks fancy.
Yeah, I do like cast. Takes a long time to get it sorted, but it comes out nice. Much nice tank quality in there, nice and smooth. It's easy when you just give it to someone else to do. Thanks, Denny.
Before starting on the intercooler piping, Al is modifying the top radiator hose outlet so that the turbo cooling line can be fed back into the cooling system. An alloy housing from a later model Commodore is cut up and welded onto the RB30 outlet, which not only faces the radiator hose away from the throttle body, but also allows room for a -6 AN fitting to be welded on. The hot side intercooler piping comes out from the turbo via a 90-degree silicon joiner that routes around the engine mount. Al then pieces together a few 2-inch mandrel bends and tacks them all together. On the cold side of the intercooler piping, the alternator and engine cooling fan make things a little bit tight, but as a wise man once said, a miss is as good as a mile. All of the piping is tacked together and fitting nicely, so it's back to the welding bench to finish off all the welds.
we've got the intercooler all mounted up, pipework's all done, a little bit fiddly, but just had to get it right for Tom. He had it a certain way that he wanted it, so we've delivered. Still got to put the front bar on. We have to trim it so the intercooler hangs out really low, because otherwise it's not a VL. But we'll get to that afterwards. Woody is going to fit the transmission cooler, which actually came with the trans. It goes in underneath the front seat. So it's already assembled. It's just got to be fitted, and so he'll get onto that. We've got a 3-inch exhaust for it. I got an off-the-shelf system for it because they are available for the VL. Always cheaper to buy an off-the-shelf. Heaps cheaper than fabricating it yourself. So if you can buy one that's decent quality, just do that. It's not going to be cheaper to get your mate to fabricate it, not unless he's doing it for free. So it's just a mild steel system, aluminised. It's actually for a V8 VL, because for some reason you can't buy a 3-inch VL turbo exhaust system, which seems pretty insane to me, but anyway, doesn't matter. It's just a catback, so it's just the rear half. So we're going to put a 100-cell cat in, and then fabricate a dump pipe and the front section pipe. With the dump pipe fabrication, that's the shape of the flange on the turbo. So you can see this is obviously a casting. It's not a simple shape. It's not a round hole, which would be wonderful if they all were, but that's not the case. So it's actually a bit of work to blend in this odd shape. This is a fantastic dump pipe. This is a factory Ford FG. You won't get much better than that. If that would actually fit on the car, I'd use it. So we're going to sort of emulate that sort of design. It would have been facing like that, so that's not the way it's got to face for us. So that's all I'm going to do is make a tube version of that. So let's get into it.
The oil cooler came supplied with the gearbox that Tom purchased, which we are mounting up under the driver's seat. Some holes are drilled and nutserts used to secure it to the floor. Some dash 6 line is then ran from the gearbox to the oil cooler. Fabricating the small dump pipe is quite a tedious job, as the turbo we are using still retains an internal wastegate. Cutting up a mandrel bend and shaping it to conform the flange takes a lot of trial and error. Once it's fitting snug, the centre of the dump pipe is marked out and removed so that the outer section can then be welded on. Some slight negotiation is needed for the pipe so that there's enough room for a bolt. This corner of the flange is then welded internally.
That's our dump pipe done. Just a big open hole. There's other ways to do internal wastegate dump pipes. One of the other common methods is a dual hole, which you can actually buy that flange for these. Sometimes it's easier to do it, what they call a divorced wastegate, so you have your dump pipe main tube out of your turbine, and then you have a separate smaller tube for the wastegate. It's not really easier, it just changes the difficulty from here to down here somewhere. You probably saw there's a lot of panel beating, bit of tin work in making that part, and it's always, every dump pipe's going to be different depending on where the curve is. So it's just something that you just have to keep bashing away at until you figure it out. Everyone's different. I've made hundreds of them, so I sort of know where to start, but it can be a little bit difficult to begin with. I used to make tons of divorce wastegate dump pipes back in a long time ago, 10 years ago. The problem with divorce wastegate stuff is you generally have, that's a hole and there's another hole here. What can happen on certain turbos is, not all of them, is as the wastegate flap opens, it opens one hole and then shuts the other one. Obviously not completely, but it can create a fairly large restriction, which causes boost control issues. So I shy away from that sort of stuff. There's books, technical stuff saying separate the wastegate from the turbine flow until this far down the exhaust, blah, 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 blah. That's great. It doesn't make any difference. This just works. That's why every factory dump pipe looks like this, or sometimes worse. Sometimes they don't even bother giving the wastegate any flow. It just works. So don't overcomplicate things. This is all you need. Secondly, why is it so short? Why didn't I just keep going underneath the car? This is a service matter. This is hard to get off. This is easy to get off. So you just make a short dump and then get it to where it simplifies, so it's just a single hole. Make these bolt holes accessible, and then you can take that front pipe off. If you've got to take the engine out, if you've got to take the gearbox out, all those things. Don't think you're never going to have to do it again, because you will. You might have to do it before you even get the car on the bloody road, because things go wrong. So don't cut your own throat. Just make it easy doing stuff like this. You'll probably notice a lot of factory dump pipes are exactly like that. They have a small section like that, then that leads on to the rest of the exhaust. It's a service thing. It's probably an assembly thing as well in the factory application. So they have the whole thing assembled and then that all goes in the car. But yeah, in this application, it's service as well. And it's also quite easy to make that. But if you continued it on, you're introducing all these variables, and you've got to keep taking this off the turbo all the time, which is not easily accessible, and gets harder and harder the more pipe you add to it. So short dump like this, it's also easy to work with on the bench because it's not this long, and you can just stick that on there and forget about it. It's done, and move on to the next thing. So flanges are good. Use them.
With the dump pipe made, Al can continue to fabricate the rest of the exhaust system. A 100 cell catalytic converter is also being used to comply with emissions regulations. With the front section of the exhaust welded and painted, Al moves on to fixing up the tip at the rear, which in standard form doesn't look very nice. The end of the muffler is cut off and Al is welding on a 3-inch stainless steel mandrel bend, which looks much better. The VL is very close to being cranked over for the first time, but before we do, Al fills the engine with some run-in engine oil and also tops up the automatic transmission. He then fits a new distributor cap and rotor and also replaces the ignition leads.
We're getting pretty close with the VL, almost ready to configure ECU and fire it up. So I've been just cranking away at all those little bits and pieces that you've got to do. Even though the engine's supposed to be in the car, we've moved lots of things around. So power steering reservoir I've had to move. It's off a Lancer. It used to be over there, right where the throttle is. So very impractical. It's a stupid setup as well because it has a very long suction side, which is not what you want. So that fits very nicely there. It's all plumbed up. I've rerouted the return from the rack and everything. It's all under the car now. It's all sweet. Exhaust is done. Looks good. Tip's done the way Tom wanted it. Also looks good. A few things left to do. I've done the leads. They're good. We've got to pull the tank. We're going to make sure it's clean, change the pump that's inside the tank to a Peerberg lift pump, and also change the external pump to a Peerberg 800 screw pump. Put a new filter on it. I might just fire it up as it is though, just to sort of get that out of the way, off the load off my mind. Make sure she's all good. Everything's looking sweet. I'm very happy with it. Good looking thing when you open the bonnet. So we'll charge up the battery, hook up the ECU, do some keyboard catting, and hopefully fire it up. Okay. Use
What?
good use
You can't say that. Unless you're smiling.
You know that you can't. So don't.